Thanks, Annie, for sharing your garden with us. And now we're going to be talking about keeping our trees alive in drought conditions. And when will this drought ever end? Don Gardner's here to tell us.
Well, I don't know, Tom. I wish I did.
Don,
I'm a little worried.
Don Gardner is a wonderful arborist who comes on the program routinely and regularly to talk about tree care. Know of nobody else who's better suited for this topic than you, Don. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, I love being here.
Let's talk about keeping these trees alive. A lot of us have misconceptions about where to water, what to do, what's appropriate for keeping especially younger trees alive at this time. What are some of your top recommendations? So what's the first thing a homeowner needs to know?
The first thing a homeowner needs to know is that they need to water their trees when the trees need watering, Tom. And a lot of people don't quite understand that. And a lot of people think, for example, with their native mature trees, they don't need to water them. Oh, they've always been here, they don't need me.
Right.
Well, that's just not the case. Very few have been there 50, 60 years, may not have even been there during the great drought of the 50s.
Sure.
It's important to water your trees. The smaller a tree is, the more important it is to water it. And I say smaller, I mean younger, really.
Right.
The younger a tree is, the more important it is to water it. Here in the summer, if you plant a new young tree, you better be watering it 3 times a week if you expect to make it on the other end of the summer.
Sure.
That's a huge commitment to people, especially if you're holding the hose and you've got to do it by hand. I make the joke that hardly anyone can make a commitment to even their children to water, to do something 3 times a week,
Right.
much less a young tree. It's just become critical, though. If we don't water, the trees aren't going to make it.
Sure. Well, let's take that example of a young planted tree. Now, whatever part of the year that you put it in the ground, you are making a multiple year commitment to get it through the summer times, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I generally say, Tom, that you've got to water it at least throughout all the summers for 2 or 3 summers. And that's a big commitment. One of the things that's happened recently in the last few years, though, I'll say last 15 years since I'd say the weather has gotten hotter and drier, is that used to we could water a new young tree, get it established in 3 years, let's say, and then wean it off of watering and not have to water it anymore. Now, with the summers we've started having, people are doing that. They're getting their trees established, they're watering properly, then they're backing off. They want to be xeriscape. They want to be, conserve water. But those trees are not making it in these summers that we're having, even though they're well established. And so one of the really important things for folks is if you've got a tree that's been planted in the last 10 years, I will say, you have got to water it in these harsh summers we have. At least once a week in the harsh summers. That will do it.
Okay. Now let's describe how to water.
Well, how to water really depends on the size of the tree, the age of the tree, the weather that we're having. But generally, I would say, let's take mature trees. In our good part of the year, let's say September through May, and I break the year into 2 parts and then I overlap them a little. September through May, once a month or once every other month, if the weather's kind of normal and not too hot and we're sort of having some rains along. Once you get from May to September, though, some of that's going to be really hard and hot. And then that period of time, you've got to water the trees. And we're talking about older trees, bigger trees, once a month in those harsh times. Once we get to 100-degree afternoons, you cannot let your tree go a whole month without watering.
Right.
It's got to come in like 2 to 3 weeks. Get that ground soaked under the trees.
Right.
Young trees, you just got to water them 2 or 3 times a week in the summer and at least once a week all year long. If we get an inch or more of rain, you can put that off for a week if you're watering a young tree. But once that week's passed, right back to watering the tree.
Or light showers do not count when it
do
comes to
not
watering
count.
trees.
A significant rainfall, I call it, inch or more. I try to get people to put those inch or more rainfalls on their calendar because 3 weeks later, it seems like it was 2 months earlier.
Right, right.
If you don't know when your last significant rain was, you have a very hard time knowing when to water your trees.
Now, one thing that I think people have gotten much more attuned to is where to water, where the roots of the trees are that are going to be taking the water in. There's still a lot of folks who think that you put the water right at the trunk. But more and more people seem to be waking up to the fact that you've got to go out there beyond that drip line. Where do you recommend the real targeted area for watering should be?
Well, let's talk about a medium-aged tree. Let's talk about a 10 to 15-year-old tree. It's not a really old tree. It's not a little bitty tree that you've got to water. Small trees that you just plant, you've got to put the water right in the root ball until the tree gets started. Tree roots will grow out of the root ball that you dug for it after they're established, not the first couple of years perhaps here, but after they're established, 18 to 24 inches a year. So you've got to keep moving with the roots. Once you get your little tree established, then you got to start watering further out where the roots are going. For a young tree, you water right in the root ball. For trees that are 10 years old or older, you don't want to water at the root ball. In fact, all kinds of funguses are hanging out at the base of trees, all the time, all our soils. Water is like food to funguses, and so we just say when you're watering yourself, don't water the trunk area. When it rains, it's going to water it. We can't do anything about that. But a 10-year-old tree is very likely to have a 20-foot root spread, the radius of the roots, 20 feet out on all sides. You don't need to water the first 5 feet from the trunk. The big roots come off, but the fine feeder roots, the root fans, are out there from 5 feet to 20 feet. And so that's the band, a big donut around a tree that you water. Now, if you're even more constricted or limited on your water, you get out about the outside of the branch line of the tree and try to water a little outside the branch line and a little inside the branch line. And that's where soaker hoses are going to come in handy in the future for watering trees. And people are figuring out some innovative ways of moving soaker hoses. One of the problems with soaker hoses watering trees is that they don't water out very far, and you got to. And most people have got to mow their grass, so the soaker hoses are going to be in the way. Nonetheless, with soaker hoses or with any way you want to water, the outside of the donut, into the branches, a little bit outside, a little bit inside, is the prime area to water trees. If you just water that area, your tree will prosper and be healthy and vigorous.
So again, look to the drip line and that donut, as you describe it, outside of that. I think really critically important. Now, there are a couple different things that I think are really interesting that we were talking about before the interview, and that is the different kinds of roots. There are woody roots, and they're absorbing roots.
There are.
And we've been losing trees throughout Central Texas because those absorbing roots have been receding or dying on a lot of these young
Absolutely
trees.
dying. The dynamic with the heat and the drought that we've been having is that the heat and the drought starts killing the small feeder roots. And they may be way out from the tree when the drought first starts, but they began to disappear. Some people call it dropping the roots. Trees don't actually drop them, but they disconnect from them. And the root systems get smaller and smaller and smaller until after a while the tree has only woody roots, and that's when we start seeing the crown die or total death in the tree. The fine feeder roots are really what we need to keep alive, and it's what we water and what we build up the soil or amend the soil to take care of.
Yeah, I think that thinking of it as the spongy area of the root zone and keeping that adequate moisture in the soil to sustain that, because otherwise, I mean, the tree could actually lose moisture through those exposed soft roots.
Well,
they'll start to shed them.
Well, and it's a balance. And some people say, never let your soil get too dry. I will often say that. Some people say, keep an even soil moisture. But people I've talked to in the last couple of years, homeowners, they have trouble with what's called even soil moisture, which is an ideal situation. But around here, 3 or 4 days of heat will take any even soil moisture you were even considering out of the soil. So really, I think the thing is to have a regular watering schedule, realize the length of time trees can go without watering, and just figure out what works for you, but we've got to get the water to the trees.
And I think that's very wise. And also, people need to be aware of how shallow these root systems are.
They are very shallow. A lot of people still don't realize that roots go out, they don't go down. And even in East Texas where I'm from, roots don't go down very far. The soil's a little better, so maybe they go a little deeper. But here, 80% of all tree roots are in the top 4, 5, 6 inches of soil. So we have this little thin layer of tree roots that are reaching out, going for resources. And with 5 inches of soil and tree roots and 5 months of 100 degrees, it's not a big,
Right.
duh as to, why this is happening to us.
Right.
5 inches of soil, the sun's just going to take that moisture right out.
It's going to cook it, especially in the kinds of soils that we have here in Central Texas.
Yep.
Well, Don, thank you as always for
Thank you,
being
Tom.
part of our program. I know that a lot of folks will want to be in touch with you. Don Gardner, certified arborist and a consulting arborist who can help you with your home trees and make sure that they will survive the drought. Thanks for being a part of our program. Coming up next is our friend Daphne.